So, we have talked about the clergy letter at length. What is the clergy letter? It's an official document signed by over 17,000 churches. 17,000 churches. And what does the clergy letter, what are you signing on to? If your church signs the clergy letter, what are you basically signing on to? Yeah?
Don't mix science and religion.
But at least the people with the clergy letter are denying creation. They are saying that evolution happened in full. I mean, at least they've picked a side. Not saying they picked the right side, but they picked a side. But we looked at 4 groups of people over the last 2 weeks that will not pick a side. The first one is what? Theistic evolution. What is the basic premise of theistic evolution?
God created it, but it evolved.
God started the Big Bang Theory. In other words, God just started the whole thing. He ignited it like a fire and then let the chips fall where they may. What's wrong with theistic evolution from a Christian standpoint?
It's not biblical.
Okay. It's not biblical. Now, if you want to say creation isn't scientific, that's a different discussion. But theistic evolution is not biblical because what does Genesis tell us? 6 literal days God specifically created everything. Now,
It's interesting. One of my favorite rock groups is the Alan Parsons Project, which basically was a studio group.
Right.
They've been like
Yeah.
stage.
Classic, yeah.
They have an album called I, Robot, and the lead track on that is actually called Genesis chapter 1 verse 32. Genesis ends in 31.
Right.
So I, Robot verse 32.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry for meaningless side note.
In Phil Collins' video, for those of us that grew up in the 80s, MTV actually had music videos. I know that's shocking, but Phil Collins had a song called Jesus, He Knows Me. And it's a song about a televangelist who makes a lot of money. He wrote the song basically, and it's an anti-Christian song mocking Jim Baker and Jimmy Swaggart and all these guys. And in the video, a guy is holding up a sign that says Genesis 3:23, which also, but to their point, they are making up verses, and if Christians don't know that they don't exist or they don't look it up, they're winning. So theistic evolution is the idea that evolution really happened and God lied about creation. There's no other way to spin it. Okay? Now, what about the gap theory? What was the premise behind the gap theory?
There's a gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2.
Yeah, there's a 6 billion year gap between Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 that he just forgot to mention. Now, according to this gap theory, what happened during Genesis 1 and Genesis 2? Evolution took place. So God really did it, but, okay? What is the third, or the day-age theory? It's a hybrid of the gap theory. What's the day-age theory?
That each day of the 6 is a much longer period than
Billions of years. Yeah, yeah. So what is it that all of these people are doing?
Trying to fit their narrative into Scripture.
Yeah, yeah. So what are they doing? I can tell you this as a math teacher. I have kids. I will give a test. And I will give them 80 minutes to complete the test, and there'll be 10 questions on it. Now, granted, they're not necessarily, in trigonometry, it's not 1 plus 1. I mean, it takes time to work through the problems. most kids get done in about 20 minutes, maybe 30. Okay? But I give them the whole period. In fact, if you remember, if you were in my class, a lot of times I put word searches or something on the test, like from the newspaper, just to keep you busy if you want, just to entertain you, because I get it. You got to wait for everybody. If a kid comes up to me after 80 minutes and only has 2 questions done, says, Mr. Ellis, I need more time. No, you don't. You don't know how to do it. You can stare at it all you want. You don't know how to do it. And so now, you're going to love this. If you are a taxpayer, you're absolutely going to love this. There is now, when we were kids, there was special education where you got an IEP, an individual education plan, okay? Well, now there's something even more powerful than an IEP. It's called a 504. Ivy, you're going to learn all about 504s if you become a teacher.
I am right now.
A 504 is basically a plan that says that this kid needs more time. And he can have he or she, if you get the right 504, you have an infinite amount of time to complete any given test. In other words, these little kids, they can't handle the pressure, and so we give them all the time they want. So if the kid wants to take 3 weeks on a test, there's nothing you can do about it. This is how far we have. Did I misrepresent that, Ivy? That's exactly what it is. So the bottom line is, I don't know how to do this. I didn't do my homework. I didn't do any of this studying. I'm going to buy time. And if I buy enough time, eventually what? I'm going to figure it out. Do you see what these students are doing? They're buying time. And you know what? If we're being honest, we've used that same excuse at some point in our life where we had no intention of doing something and we were just buying time hoping it would go away. It's called a to-do list if you're if you live in the United States and you are a husband, it is called a to-do list, okay? Although I'm usually pretty good about those. So, what are these 3 groups of people trying to do? They're trying to buy time. Why do they need time? Because evolution, the only thing that evolution has is what? Time. So basically, what they are doing is they are giving the Bible a 504. That's exactly what they're doing. In other words, if we could just get billions of years, anything could happen, because we know evolution happened. What if it didn't? What if it didn't? Okay? We're going to discuss this. Now, why did I leave progressive revelation out? Danae, do you know what progressive revelation is? Okay. It is the biblical equivalent of something called punctuated equilibrium. Do you remember what punctuated equilibrium is?
Crocodile giving birth to a bird.
Correct. Why did that come up? Because as we examined the fossil record, we found there were no transitional species at all. So evolutionists came up with something called punctuated equilibrium, which says somewhere along the line, 2 lions must have had a chimpanzee. I mean, that's the only way. That would explain how the fossil record works. Now, there's some DNA problems with that, but nonetheless, it works. Progressive revelation is the Christian equivalent of punctuated equilibrium. What it states is God created different species at different times. So he created sharks, and then he waited a couple billion years, and then he created crocodiles. And then he eventually created birds, but he did it in different stages. Genesis says he did it on the same literal day. Problem. Okay, now, letter D in the review before we move on. What is the intention of all 4 of these theories? What is the intention?
Take away the glory from God.
Okay. I would agree with you because I do believe that. But do you think that was their initial intention? I don't think that's the result. I agree that's the result. And for some people that would be true.
To be inclusive.
To be inclusive. Meaning what?
so that we can all agree and get along.
Because we all know that we don't want to offend evolutionists. We don't want to tell them they're wrong. I had a poetry class one time in college. I will never forget it. I was a mathematics major. So, I'm doing Calc 3, I'm doing differential equations. These are horribly difficult classes, at least for an idiot like me. And so I had this class of poetry. And the professor was one of the weirdest human beings I've ever met in my life. This lady was just like, you talk about coming out of the 60s as a flower child. You would read a poem, and then she would say, tell me what it means to you. And people would come up with the weirdest things. Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that. Well, once I figured the game out, I was the weirdest one. This poem about a flower, this is about corporate America. That's what this is. When those petals fall off, those are the workers. Those are the families. Yes, go on. The rain looks like a good thing. Those are bonuses. But all they're designed to do is keep the people working, but they don't give them a raise, they just give them a bonus, so it's not perpetual. She was applauding me. I'm like, lady, I'm mocking you. I'm making fun of you right now, lady. This is about a flower, that's all it is.
You remember, did you ever watch the movie What About Bob? Roses are red, violets are blue, I'm schizophrenic, and so am I.
Yeah, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not really all out to get you. So what we've done in the church, these are professing Christians making up these theories. We want the evolutionists to come too, and then we're going to tell them about Jesus. Ivy, Danae, in 20 words or less, tell me what the seeker-sensitive church is today.
It's a church that's scared of stepping on anyone's toes, and their goal is to just attract people to,
And how do they do that?
by looking like the world.
What is this? Same thing. We're worried about it. I don't know if I got that thing posted or not, but I tried to post it yesterday. Spurgeon had a quote that said, someday, instead of the shepherds leading the sheep, there's going to be clowns entertaining goats in the churches. Spurgeon was ahead of his time. That's what we have. So, do you think they meant well when they created these theories? You know, I honestly do. I honestly believe that. There was a time when, most of us, I know Perino has talked about this, that the seeker-sensitive movement made a lot of sense to you. When you first started pastoring and you were doing everything you could to just get people in. What happened?
Fell apart.
It fell apart. And so does this when we take the Bible and we try to reinterpret God and tell him what he really meant. Now, we're going to look at a couple of things here. Let's go to Roman numeral 2 here, okay? Now, while we are going to, in this class for today, give Darwin all of the credit for the theory of evolution, it really wasn't his. He had many, many people before him, during him, and after him that were... Do you know that Darwin wasn't a biologist? Did you know that? Do you know what his degree was in?
Theology.
Theology, that's true. He was a theologian. And he writes in The Origin of Species that the reason why he turned to evolution is because he couldn't believe in a God that would create creatures that would kill each other. How could a loving God was basically... So Darwin became so repulsed by what he saw, he just forgot about Genesis 3. But if he would have he was so repulsed that he came up with his own theory. And as much as we think about that, we have people in our lives and in this church right here that do the same thing. They reject the Bible and they come up with their own theories and they preach them as if it were fact. Okay? Tom, why don't we start with Roman numeral 2 here?
Each of the theories above have one thing in common. They require a very old earth.
Do we agree with that? What do I mean by very old earth? Billions of years. According to the Bible, how old is the earth?
4.58 billion.
According to the Bible, it's about 6,000 years old. Okay?
Old by.
Right. Okay? All right, Tom, keep going.
One thing is certain, if the earth isn't billions of years old, then none of them can be true.
Do we agree with that statement? If the earth is not billions of years old, then there's no possible way that evolution could have happened, macroevolution could have happened in any way, shape, or form. Fact, right? All right, keep going.
In Darwin's theory, time is the champion of all things. Given enough time, anything is possible. If, however, the earth isn't billions of years old, then all the above falls apart. Do we agree? If you are one of those obnoxious and ignorant literal Bible believers, how old is the earth? According to a literal Genesis, the earth is about 6,000 years old. If Adam was created on a literal day 6, we can trace his timeline of 930 years of life.
Okay, now when we go back,
This, if you take though then the day-age theory, where they're saying that each day means
billions of years.
billions of years. Now Adam lived 930 years. Now you're contradicting yourself.
That's right.
By doing that, and that increases the belief that the Bible cannot be true.
For those of you that were not here on the first week, I told a story from my personal life about one time when I got beat up really bad. Two of the neighbors were brothers and they got in a fight. And their dad came up to my house with both of the brothers because they got in trouble. And they said that the fight started when Scott swore at Mark. And so the father said, I got one question for you. Did Scotty swear at Mark? I didn't know what to do. He did. By the way, he did. I don't know if I ever let that out. I said, well, I tried to split the difference. I said, yeah, he swore, but he didn't really swear at Mark. I tried to split the difference, so they both got in trouble, and then they both beat me up. If I would have picked one side or the other, at least I would have had a chance, but I actually united those two. See how dumb I was? It's the same thing here. If God created the world, then God created the world. Evolution didn't happen. It's really simple. There's no, well, he kind of, sort of. Pick a lane. All right, keep going, Tom.
Using the biblical genealogy timelines, there are 1,656 years between creation and the flood. Adam was created on day 6, and he lived 930 years.
Do you know that by that definition, how old was Noah when he built the ark? 600. Is there an overlap? It's real close. There's no recorded conversations of the two, but Methuselah was who? But he was Noah's grandfather, right? So Methuselah would have known Adam. So these people knew each other. Fascinating. Okay?
Do you think Moses was saying when Adam was running around in shorts?
I think. All right. So, anyhow, following the timeline, we can accurately do the math and arrive at Noah. From the flood to Abraham is about 2,000 years, and they list the names to Jesus. Bottom line is, do we understand, without going into any heavy math here, or simple math, that the earth, according to Genesis, is about 6,000 years old? Okay? Why does that make us a laughingstock, if we believe that?
Because our culture is so saturated with the so-called truth of evolution. It's everywhere.
I am not going to ask anybody for a personal answer, but it's been screamed so many times over the years. Do you have doubts about it? Are you confused about the age of the earth in your own mind or your own heart? I think a lot of people are. And I think there's a lot of truly well-meaning Christians who are genuinely confused about it. It just is. I remember about 100 years ago when I was teaching at East High School, there was a Muslim kid that was coming to the Bible study. And in fact, he got so into it that he started coming out to Randy's house for a Bible study. And his name was Mumal. And he was bringing his Muslim friends. It was unbelievable. Sharon, do you remember Mumal? And one day he asked me this question. He said, Mr. Hillhouse, he says, I just have one question. I said, okay. I said, I probably don't know the answer, but he said, I understand that Jesus was born of a virgin. I understand that he's the Messiah. I understand that he rose from the dead. You couldn't have made it any more clear. He said, what I don't understand is why God sent Muhammad 600 years later with a different message. What was Mumal's real problem? Ivy, what was Mumal's real problem?
Trying to fit Jesus and as a Messiah to his own religion.
He'd been raised his whole life as a Muslim. And while he intellectually understood everything I explained, he couldn't cut out what he couldn't unlearn. And so he was trying to fit the two together. And there are so many Christians who have learned for so many years that the earth is billions of years old and that Darwin was right, that when we finally get to Genesis, they can't unlearn what they've been taught. But it's not just Genesis. I see Ivy and Nancy struggle with this every day. Well, I don't see them every day, but every time I see them, what are you struggling with? What am I referring to? Okay, but the legalism that you were brought up in, it still bothers you. It still does. And you're still being mocked and pulled from where you came from. And we can laugh and we can make it as clear as we want, but the truth of the matter is, you have 16 or 17 or 20 years of the 21 that you've been alive that are, so it's still a struggle. And I think for a lot of Christians, a literal Genesis can become a real struggle just because of that same principle. And we all have things that we're hung up on that we were untaught and we can't unlearn. It's just true. When I give pitching lessons to kids, I don't really do it anymore, but when I used to, there were times, if I get a kid who's 15 years old, I've actually said this to people, it would be better for me to teach you to throw left-handed because you have so many bad habits. I think it's too late. I don't think you can. Now, Danae is a very interesting case because Danae had little, almost no biblical training or teaching in her life. So when she came here, she didn't have to unlearn things to learn them. I'm not conceding that she's learned anything. I'm just saying that, All right, moving on. Now, I actually had this conversation with someone in this church who will remain nameless, Roman numeral 3, okay? And not in this room. Danae, would you read Roman numeral 3?
Doesn't carbon dating prove that the Earth is actually much older than 6,000 years?
Okay, now, have you heard that? Carbon dating disproves the Bible? Mm-hmm. One of the things that I asked the person was, do you understand how carbon dating works? Do you understand the premise of it? Do you understand the math of it? Well, no. I said, so how can you then say that? Well, I was just told that. I said, well, I'm telling you it's different. Well, I don't know what to believe. What you're saying then is, whoever that person is has more authority in your life than I do because I'm telling you it didn't happen. That's what it comes down to. This really comes down to authority, doesn't it? Okay? So, moving on. Keep going, Ivy.
Before we touch that question, what would you consider proof? Is proof a common thing?
Okay. What is proof? What is proof? Proof is,
The evidence that something is true.
right. In other words, you saw it or you know that it's true. There's no faith involved. You know it's true. That's proof. Okay? There is proof that I was in church today. First thing is I have witnesses. Second thing is my cell phone right here. Christian told me this, that when we come to church, that somehow on the router it picks up who is here. I don't know. He said it was interesting. He said he can tell like who comes like during the week if like, because the router will pick up the signal. So if you're going to break in here and steal something, leave your phone in the car. That's what I learned from that. Bottom line is there's all kinds of proof that I was in church today, okay? Now, is proof a common thing in the real world? In a court case? Generally not. In a murder case, I watch Law and Order all the time. Almost never is there a witness. So how do they determine guilt or innocence? You gather evidence. And the evidence speaks, essentially, okay? So how do we determine whether evolution or creation happened if there was no eyewitnesses? What do? Evidence. Let's see if carbon dating really works that way. Keep going, Ivy.
Generally, we look at evidence and then determine the most likely scenario and call it proof. What is carbon dating? Do most people understand the process? Can they do the math? Every living thing on the planet takes in carbon. We get it from plants. Everyone has it.
Okay. Does Perino have carbon? Perino doesn't eat plants. How does Perino have carbon in his body if he's a meatitarian?
He eats animals that eat plants.
That's correct. The animals that he's eating eat plants. So therefore, indirectly, he has carbon in his body. I didn't say carbs, I said carbon. Okay, carbs he won't touch. Carbon, that make sense? Okay. Now, we're not going to get into any chemistry here. Derek's not here, but keep going.
In chemistry, carbon is called C12. However, there is an isotope called C14. What is that? An isotope is a radioactive derivative of a parent function.
Okay, an isotope is like a mutation. That's all it is. Okay? Do we need any more clarification than that? An isotope is like a mutation. Okay? Keep going.
All that really matters is that C14 evaporates at a constant rate. Eventually, it goes bad. C14 has a half-life of 5,730 years. This means that it evaporates half of itself every cycle.
Okay, now, I got a trick. What does it mean to evaporate in a half-life? Okay, I'm going to take this wet rag right here, and I'm going to wipe it on this board. I'm going to wipe it right here, okay? Now, you can clearly see there's water on that, okay? Now, in 20 minutes, is that water going to be there?
Probably not.
It won't. Why not? What happens? It evaporates, okay? So if I told you that I put water on that 30 seconds ago and it's dry, guess what? I'm lying. How do you know I'm lying? This is still a little wet. How do you know I'm lying? Because if it's evaporated, it's going to take about 15 minutes for that water to completely dissipate, okay?
It's like washing paint, right?
Exactly. Same thing. Although you're supposed to keep going and let it do it on its own, but some painters get paid by the hour. How do I know that I wipe that down? Right now, it's still moist. The water hasn't evaporated yet. How does this simulate half-lives of C14? When something dies, the C14 starts to what? Evaporate. Where does it go? Into the atmosphere, into the air, okay? So, if something is dead, if you shoot a deer, let's just say here in Pennsylvania, okay, and you trace it for a day, you have to track it for a day before you can find it, and you drag it out of the woods. In 24 hours after it's dead, does it have more or less or the same amount of C14 than it did when you shot it? Less. Maybe a little bit less, but it starts to decay the minute you die. Make sense? So, in theory, we should be able to dig up somebody we know when they died. We should be able to test their bones or their body, and we could be able to figure out how much C14 they have because we know the evaporation rate. If someone died 100 years ago, we're going to expect to find less than we did someone who died 2 years ago. Sadly, my uncle passed away in June 1st. He got cremated. I guess that's a bad example. But, I mean, the bottom line is that it keeps dissipating. Does that make sense? What does a half-life mean? Adrian, you know what a half-life means?
It's like when an element turns into another element.
It does, but what does the half-life principle mean? If I start with 1 pound, okay, and the half-life is 5,730 years, okay? That's the half-life, okay? How much is left after if I have 1 pound, how much is left after 5,730 years? Half a pound, okay? That's called 1 half-life, okay? Another 6,000 years goes by. How much is left? 1/4 of a pound, right? Go another cycle, 5,000 years, 1/8 of a pound. Does it ever really go away to 0? It will never get to 0. Do you understand that? It gets closer and closer, but it never gets there. And every kid in America understands this if you have a sibling. Okay? I guarantee you Andrea has done this. I guarantee you at some point her parents screamed at her, "Stop bothering your sister. Don't touch your sister." And then you went up to her and "I'm not touching you." And you get as close as you can just to irritate them. You guys know that game? Yeah? It's the same thing with a half-life. It never fully goes away. I didn't touch her. I didn't touch her. Shelley, does that sound familiar?
The only time she's never got a spanking except one.
Okay.
She was doing, and then I'm like, oh my gosh. That's not
Okay.
true.
Okay, Danae, go to Roman numeral 3, C3 right now, half-life. C14.
C14 has a half-life of 5,730 years. This means that it evaporates half of its life every cycle. If we start out with 1 pound of C14, 5,730 years, we will have half a pound.
Does that make sense? Okay, keep going.
After 11,460 years, we are left with 1/4 of a pound. After 17,190 years, we are left with 1/8 of a pound. Will you ever get to 0? If you understand this concept, congrats. This is a calculus concept.
Do you understand that you will never get to 0? It will get infinitely close, but it'll never get there. Okay? Now here's the rub. Read the next one.
After only 20 half-lives,
Only 20 half-lives.
you would only have 1 out of 1,400,000
48,000.
1,048,576 pounds.
Okay. Can you measure 1/1,000,000th of a pound? You can't do it. There's nothing there to measure. At least it's not measurable. Do you agree with that? So even if you started with a pound, which we don't have a pound, we only have a little bit because it's an isotope. Could you measure 1/1,000,000th? Could you do it? Ivy?
So like, when they find samples of carbon dating, it's usually from ice because when stuff is dead and it's in heat, it evaporates quicker, it decays quicker.
Mhm.
So how would that affect the half-life time?
It wouldn't. The half-life is still the half-life. The ambient temperature has nothing to do with the actual half-life of the isotope. Okay? So while it might speed it up a little bit, ice would be an uncommon example because but here's the rub on that. if you carbon date something at 100,000 years old, what are you saying? You're saying that we found 1/1,000,000th of what was there, right? Can you measure that? No chance. So if you find something and you carbon date it at 100,000 years old, what are you admitting? There was nothing to measure. It was so. Do you understand how shaky this is?
What about when they find like bones, like mammoths and stuff?
Great question. What about it?
Don't they carbon date the bones?
They do. And if there's any carbon in it, what does that tell you? If there's a measurable amount of carbon in it, what does it tell you? Hadn't been there that long. Right now, that's completely dry. Same concept. Do you know how I know that this is still a little bit damp? It means it hasn't been there that long. I did that 6 hours ago. No, you didn't. No, you didn't. Do you understand how shaky this is? Oh, no, carbon dating just proves about. No, this is really the math. This is really how they do it. Now, read E. Keep going, Tanea.
Are you thinking that there would be nothing left to really measure? You would be right. If we can measure any C4, it simply hasn't been there that long. Are we clear on that?
Does that make sense? Okay. Tom, number 4.
Off the top of your head, can you think of any potential problems with this method? Well, we can measure what C14 is left. Does it tell us how much we started with?
See, isn't that a wonderful thing? When we find a dead creature and we measure the carbon, we have no idea. All we know is what's left. We don't know how much was there. If you watch Law and Order and someone has their wallet stolen and there's $10 in it, we don't know if that's how much was in there. We have no idea. So what are you doing what do you have to do with carbon dating? You have to guess and you have to assume, right? Oh, no, this is science. There's no guessing. No, this is guessing. Do you understand how ridiculous this is? Now, let me be clear. Does carbon dating work? It does. If we have the known elements, the math works. But when we start guessing, guess what? We're no different than the creationists who believe something they can't see either. Keep going here, Tom.
How do we determine how much we started with? We call it extrapolation. This is a fancy way of saying that we assume or guess. Is this proof?
Okay.
We are also assuming that the atmosphere has always been stable. Do we know that? Without asking Dolores, how can we know what things were like before the flood?
How can we know what the atmosphere was like before the flood? Leave Dolores alone. And in case anybody knows, I have the utmost respect and love for Dolores. I have never met a tougher human being in my life. If we get 8 feet of snow next week, I may not be here. Dolores will. She will. She would dig it by hand if she had to. She's going to be here. And I respect that. So I do. I really do. All right. Ivy, I know you got questions, so you do D.
In addition to carbon dating, there are other methods like potassium argon. These methods work on the same principle as carbon dating. What must be admitted?
What must be admitted if we use potassium argon? We still have no idea how much we started with. So is this really science or is this?
Well, that's like what geology is. I remember my professor just making up different scenarios. Okay, for this to have happened, this dinosaur would have had to done this and this, and they have no proof.
That's exactly right.
Hypothesis.
And you know what? That doesn't mean that every hypothesis is wrong. But a hypothesis is not proof. Now, I'm going to give you a scenario here. I assume that Tom's car started today. Okay? You know how I know that? I don't know that. But he's here. Okay? And he doesn't look any more disheveled than normal. He didn't do anything. He didn't tell me, oh, I'm having a bad day, my car broke down. I'm assuming, now I don't have any proof, his neighbor could have walked to church. I don't know. But based on my assumptions, my hypothesis, his car started, and this is a normal Sunday so far for him. Can I prove? Do I have proof of that? I do not. But that's a logical assumption. So let me be clear. I'm not saying that scientists are stupid. I'm saying that they take logical assumptions and build on them But that's not proof. That's not proof. Andrea and Shelley in the medical, and Angela in the medical field where you work, you have no idea how someone contracted what they got. You could probably speculate, oh, you got COVID. Oh, you went to a party where people had COVID. I mean, that would be a logical conclusion, but you don't know that's where they got it. I'm not trying to be political with COVID. It just popped into my head, okay? All right. Now, Roman numeral 4. Andrea.
Are there any scientific methods that can apply to a young Earth? Would that prove it?
Okay. Let's go over what we have to have for science. What are they, Andrea?
There are a few rules that we need to establish before we can talk about anything being science. The first rule is that whatever we are talking about must be observable. The second rule is that what we are talking about must be repeatable. The third rule is that everything must be interrelated. Put another way, biology cannot contradict chemistry. They must work together. The same thing is true about physics and math. There are no contradictions. Science simply attempts to explain how things work. It is the opposite of magic.
Okay. Do we get that? Now, what does it mean that something has to be observable in order for it to be scientific? You have to see it in a lab. You have to see it. What about repeatable?
Do the same test again.
You've got to be able to get the same result over and over again for it to be a scientific method. But probably the most important is it's interrelated. You don't find something in physics that contradicts chemical laws. It all works together. Do you understand that? Okay? Now, Andrea, keep going here louder and slower when we get to B.
When it comes to both creation and evolution, there are no witnesses. What does that mean? Based on our definitions, what must be true about both creation and evolution? Creation and evolution both fall into the category of theories. What is a theory?
Okay, what's a theory? What's a theory?
Educated guess.
It's an educated guess. Let's be really clear about something here. I am an absolutely devout Genesis believer, okay? But it's not proof. I didn't see it, and I can't repeat it. So I cannot say with 100% certainty that Genesis of the earth is exactly 6,000 years old. I cannot say that. I cannot. I am admitting that I am using faith and my belief system to arrive at that conclusion. Can an evolutionist say that they're not using faith to believe in a 5 billion-year-old earth? They can't. Let's be honest. Neither one of us can prove our case.
I think we have a much better case.
That's a different story. I agree with you.
We have Adam and things were passed down through communication
Agreed.
and then recorded by Moses.
I totally agree with everything you're saying, but to an outsider, that's not proof. It's faith. You have faith in the Genesis account, so do I. But the evolutionist exercises just as much or more faith than we do to believe their theory. Do we agree with that? In fact, I would even say more, but neither here nor there. Now, I am going to need a volunteer here, okay? Now, keep reading here, Andrea.
If we don't have eyewitnesses, how can we determine which side we believe?
And that was where Jack was going to, okay? The first thing we're going to do is something that's never been done in a Sunday school before. Danae, would you read Roman numeral 5?
I'm certain the topic of thermodynamics isn't being covered in any other Sunday school today.
Bro, what's thermodynamics, Ella? Do you know what it is? You forgot? You never knew or you forgot?
Yes.
Yes. Danae, do you know what thermodynamics is? That's all it is. It is the most basic and improvable of all laws of science. This water right here, it's warmer than it was when I took it out of the fridge. Why?
Dissipated.
Everything seeks equilibrium. So simply put, that coffee is colder than it was. And this is getting warmer. They are both seeking equilibrium. This was not cold when it was purchased. It was stuck in a refrigerator and it adapted to its surroundings. Same with your coffee. That's why we get insulated mugs to slow down the process, but ultimately it's the same thing. Now, there are two laws of thermodynamics. The first one is this. Energy or matter, Einstein put this together, cannot be created nor destroyed. If I take this piece of paper and I light it on fire, did it disappear? It didn't. It went from a solid to a gas. All I did was transform it. When you take ice and you melt it, it becomes a liquid. When you boil it, it becomes a gas. Did the molecules go away or did it just change forms? Okay. Matter cannot be created nor destroyed. What does that mean?
Something doesn't come from nothing.
Can't. It can't. The second thing is, the second law of thermodynamics states that energy flows from high to low. That's what it is. That's why things cool off. Things seek equilibrium. That's all it means. Nothing gets better. This thing cannot get hot on its own. If this thing came out of the fridge and all of a sudden I burned myself on it, something happened. It's not possible unless this table was heated and it was getting energy from somewhere else. There's no way I'm burning myself on this. Do you get that? Now, who do you think is the most trustworthy person here? Nah, he's an Alabama fan.
Definitely not. Pick somebody else.
Ella, come here, bro. You're going to be on camera. You're going to be broadcast in the Philippines. You're going to become TikTok famous. Okay, now, you just stand right here with me, bro. Now, I want you to hold this. Is it cold? Is it hot? No. Just normal, okay? Just hold on to it, okay? Now, let's go over this here, okay? To make things extra simple, okay, have you ever heard of a physicist named Lamb who invented Lamb's theory? Nancy, have you ever heard of Lamb's theory? You're going to love this, Nancy. You're going to love this. Do you ever get sick of people bashing you because you believe in a young earth? No? You love getting bashed by that? Or you just don't talk to people? That's true. You're quiet. You don't really talk to people. I get tired of it. I am surrounded by people who believe in a billion-year-old earth or billions of years old, okay? Now, Tom, would you read this? Because I want the simplest person to read this.
To make things extra simple, geologists have discovered that the Earth has a magnetic field. Based on thermodynamics, is this magnetic strength getting stronger or weaker?
Okay. The Earth has a magnetic field. Have you ever heard that? The Earth is a magnet. Did you know that? Okay. Is it getting stronger or weaker? Why? Because based on thermodynamics, everything gets weaker. When you buy a new car, engine's great. If you run it for 200,000 miles, what happens to the engine? Why? Because everything breaks down. Eventually, that great refrigerator in there is going to do what? It's going to die. It's going to break down. Everything breaks down. It's called the law of entropy. Second law of thermodynamics. Do you agree with that? So, the Earth has a magnetic field. How do you make a magnet? You ready for this? Okay. This is a paper clip right here, okay? Now watch this. All this is a screw with some copper around it, okay? Now, there is nothing about it. Do you agree? Look at that, bro. Is there anything that it's doing? All a magnet is, we have Erie's Magnetics here. It's one of the best companies in the world that make magnets. If you want to make a magnet, do you know how to make a magnet? All you do is you take electrical energy, okay, and you wrap it around a metal core. What's the core of the Earth? It's molten metal, isn't it? It's hot. And what does it create? All right, now, bro, what I want you to do is I want you to take this right here, okay, on this and right here. I just want you to squeeze that together nice and tight, okay? Make sure that that point is on the top, okay? You won't get shocked. You won't get shocked. Okay, there's only a couple volts here, okay? And then put this one right here, just like this, okay? Can you do that? You gotta squeeze it tight though. Now, what I want you to do, once you get them together, well, you're nervous, you're on camera in the Philippines. All right, you got that? Squeeze them together. Your hands are too small. Let me try it, okay? All right. So just be like Vanna White. Be the lovely assistant, okay? Now, when I do this right here, okay? According to this theory, what have I just created with electrical energy? A magnet. Look at that. It's a magnet. That's all it is. Now, what is the problem with this magnet? What will eventually happen? It will eventually run out of energy, and then what will happen? It will what? Now, isn't that amazing that to create a magnet, all I need is electrical energy flowing around a metal core? Okay? All right, bro, I want you to touch the battery now. Put your fingers around it. It won't hurt you. What's happening to it?
It's hot.
It's getting hot. Why is it getting hot? Because the energy cannot be created nor destroyed. So the energy is being transferred into heat, and it is dissipating into the atmosphere. Does that make sense? How long, now feel it, squeeze it. What's it doing? Eventually this battery is going to get so hot, what? That you won't be able to touch it. And then it becomes dangerous. But do you agree that that battery is a lot warmer than it was? Okay, and she's credible, she doesn't lie. She doesn't talk, so there's no way she could lie. Just kidding, bro, just kidding. See that camera right there? This is going to the Philippines, so how do you say it? It's true. All right, do you understand how this works? Now, what happens if I disconnect the circuit? It falls. Why did it fall? Because it's no longer a magnet, but what is the battery doing? But it's very warm. Do you understand that concept? Now, if the Earth is a magnet and it is weakening, what is happening to the Earth? It is doing what? It is dissipating heat. Does that make sense? Raise your hand if you completely understand this. This is not rocket science, okay? Now, you can go sit down if you want. Thank you, bro. This is still very warm. Still very warm. Now, this heat came from magnetic decay. Make sense? All right, now let's do a little math on it because the Earth is a magnet, which means the Earth must be radiating heat. All right? Now, Tom, keep going. Number 2.
Let's see. While we admit we have no idea how strong it once was, we can measure it changing today.
Okay. We don't know how much we started with, but we clearly know that it's weakening. And what is the result of it weakening? Heat. Lots of it, right? The stronger the magnet, if I had, instead of a D battery, if I had a car battery, what would happen? It would get hotter and hotter, right? And it would be more power, right? Okay. So, keep going here, Tom. If we have a half-life.
Half-life of 1,400 years, does that mean it was twice as strong 1,400 years ago?
Okay. The magnetic field of the Earth is weakening by half every 1,400 years. Every 1,400 years, it's half as strong as it is before. So if we fast forward 1,400 years from now, okay, when some of us are Dolores' age, leave Dolores alone, what is the magnetic strength of the Earth going to be? 1,400 years from now. Half of what it is right now, okay? So if we measure backwards, what would happen to the magnetic strength of the Earth? It would get stronger. Okay. So let's see if we can figure this out here, Tom. Go nice and slow here.
1,400 years ago, in the year 620 AD, the field was twice as strong as it is today.
Do you agree with that? 620 AD. America hadn't even been discovered yet. At least not by us. Right. The magnetic field was twice as strong as it is today. If it was twice as strong, what was happening? it was putting out more heat, okay? Go back 2,800 years, Tom, what happens?
In the year 780 BC, it was 4 times as strong.
Now, what would have been the case? Mathematically.
Warmer.
Got to be warmer, right? Okay? Go back another half-life.
4,200 years in the year 2800 BC, the field was 8 times as strong.
Okay, are you understanding this concept here, Poison Ivy? Hold on, what's the problem here, Ivy? Ivy, you read the next one, okay? 5,600 years ago, because that would be right around the Genesis creation. Read it.
5,600 years ago, in the year 6,220 BC, the field was 16 times stronger than it is today.
So what would that have created on the earth? A warm tropical climate. Now, isn't it interesting that we find, we're not going to get into this until another lesson, but isn't it interesting that we find oil fields in Antarctica? What does that mean? At one time, they must have been warm. Oh, yeah. Because plants had to die, right? Okay? Now, Ivy, finish this up because you look confused. Okay?
14,000 years ago, if the year 11,980 BC existed, it was 1,024 times stronger than it is today.
What would have happened if we go back just 14,000 years?
It would be too hot.
Oh, really?
There would be no life.
Oh, it would be like Puerto Rico hot. Or Sweden hot. Talk about two extremes.
Like comparing apples to apples.
All right, now, Ivy, here's the rub. 28,000 years. That's not very long, though, is it? What happens? Go ahead, do the math on this.
28,000 years ago, in the year 25,980 BC, it was 1,048,567 times stronger than it is today. What would have happened to the Earth if this is true? Where did the heat go?
Where did it go? It dissipated. But what happens if the heat is so massive that there's no way to disperse it? What's going to happen? If Sam was here or Gary was here, I would use them as an example. Your radiator hose in your car is made out of rubber. Why is it made out of rubber? What does your radiator do? Okay.
You can explain it, I'll try.
Right, but the problem is, if your car overheats, what blows? The radiator hose. Why?
Pressure.
To let the pressure out. Otherwise, the engine's going to blow, right? So it's deliberately designed, that hose, to, when it gets too hot, let the pressure out. That's the idea of it, right? So if the engine gets too hot, the radiator hose blows. Otherwise, the whole thing dies, right? Now, obviously, there's something causing that heat. If your radiator hose is blowing, you might want to have it looked at. But that's to save your life. What happens if there is no radiator hose? What would happen? Even in Perino's car, yes, the black one, what would happen? It would implode, wouldn't it? Okay, so if we go back just 28,000 years, is it possible for anything to live on Earth? Why not?
There's no creature that could withstand that heat.
Could you imagine going back 100,000 years? How about 1 billion? What's the problem with this? Now, am I saying how much we started with? I have no idea. But I know that what? It can't be, just like right now, I couldn't have wiped this off 6 minutes ago because now it's bone dry. That board is bone dry. Ivy, if you're going to be a teacher and you're going to get a whiteboard like that, you're going to learn how long it takes. Even when you wipe something off before you can write on it again, you got to let it dry.
Is that why you never clean yours?
Correct. Plus, I'm lazy. Actually, I use my smartboard now, but do you understand the problem with this? So, isn't it amazing that evolutionists will tell you that half-lives in math works for carbon dating, but it doesn't work for this? It's the same math. See the problem? Now, they're going to tell me, yeah, well, you don't know how much you started with. You're right, I don't care. Too much is too much. Am I right? All right. Ivy, read number 3.
28,000 years is a drop in the bucket in light of 6 billion years. Leave Dolores alone here. much magnetic decay happening, what would likely be the result?
We already discussed that.
Based on these numbers, could you see how someone might believe the Earth is young?
Okay. Do you think, based on what I just did, that I'm an idiot for believing the earth is not 6 billion years old? Even the most devout atheist or evolutionist would have to say, you know what? At least I see your point. We have discussions here, especially on Wednesdays all the time, where we may disagree on biblical issues. Okay? But at least I can see, like for instance, Tom and Jack had a disagreement, not a bad one, but a disagreement a couple weeks ago on a Wednesday night. We all kind of had a discussion about the elders and different things. We have a difference of opinion. They have a difference of opinion. I guarantee you Tom understands exactly where Jack's coming from.
I don't remember this, Jack. Was I here that Wednesday?
Yeah, we were discussing eldership and what the qualifications were.
Husband of one
yeah.
wife.
Yeah.
Okay, now that said, you guys have it, but you understand where he's coming from, and he understands where you're coming from, and it's perfectly fine to disagree. But when it comes to evolution, we can't have two different, you can't use half-lives for carbon dating or potassium argon and then say it doesn't work on this end. It's got to be consistent, okay? All right, finishing up here. Let's be clear. Is this proof that the earth is young? I kind of think it is, but no, it isn't. But you can see the line of thinking. All right. All right, here's our last thing. Isn't it interesting that the exact same math that evolution is used for carbon dating, is there anything wrong with the math? No. What's the problem here? Consistency. And it's also where we start. Where do we start our assumptions? There's no such thing as unbiased. A creationist looks into a microscope and says, wow, look at all the design in that cell. The evolutionist looks at the same cell and says, look at how amazing evolution is. But you start with a different premise. Are we going to convince someone that the earth is 6,000 years old if they don't want to be convinced? If the Holy Spirit doesn't open their eyes? No. But is it our duty as Christians to be able to defend our faith and to give logical answers? Ivy, does this help a little bit? Age of the earth? We're going to look at a lot more. But do you agree that if we have a young earth, evolution didn't happen? If we have a young earth, we have to submit to the God of the Bible. I don't want to submit to the God of the Bible. Therefore, we have an old earth. Tom, would you close us in prayer?